In our next session, I'll be talking with Martin Seligman and Gabriella Rosen Kellerman, whose new book, Tomorrowmind, explores what it takes to thrive in the increasingly stressful world of work. Marty is the Zellerbach Family Professor of Psychology and Director of the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania, where he focuses on positive psychology, learned helplessness, prospection, optimism, and positive education. He is a best-selling author of 30 books, including Flourish, and 350 journal articles. He's a past president of the American Psychological Association and has received numerous awards recognizing the enormous impact he's had on his field, including in 21, he was named the most influential psychologist in the world by Academic Influence. His mission is the attempt to transform social science to work on the best things in life: strengths, positive emotion, good relationships, meaning, and human flourishing. Gabriella Rosen Kellerman is an author, entrepreneur, startup executive, and Harvard-trained physician with expertise in behavioral and organizational change, digital health, well-being, and AI. She has served as Chief Product Officer and Chief Innovation Officer at BetterUp and as head of its research arm, BetterUp Labs, which is partnered with labs at Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, Stanford, and others. Gabriella has worked on global mental health policy and interventions for the World Health Organization. Welcome, Gabriella, and welcome, Marty. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. I have a copy of your fabulous new book. It's an advanced copy. I'm sure the one in bookstores looks a little fancier and probably has a hardback, but really great read. We had a wonderful article from you both in our last issue as well, talking about some of the work. That's really helpful. So I'd like to begin by asking, what brought the two of you together as researchers and what prompted you to write the book?
Sure. Thanks for having us, Elizabeth. I will maybe take the first pass and then hand it to you, Marty. So we came together in 2017. At the time, the CEO of BetterUp, Alexi Robichaud, had asked me to start BetterUp Labs, which you can think of as kind of like a Bell Labs for the world of work, for the world of thriving at work. And in that effort, positive psychology was a major influence because it's all about how can we take a rigorous scientific approach to performing better, living better, optimizing our potential. And Marty, as the father of that field, was someone that was, I was determined to work with. And so we reached out to Marty and set about defining a research trajectory. And now, more than 6 years into that partnership, we've accomplished so much by way of data collection, analysis, partnerships with labs around the world to really define these sort of future of work skills, define how do we build them, what are the organizational, professional, personal outcomes when we do that. We felt like it was time to put it all in a book, and that's really where Tomorrowmind came from. Marty, anything you would add?
Yes. What inspired me to do the book with Gabriella were two major studies on who fails at work and who succeeds at work that I had done with United States Army. So starting in 2009, we followed the entire United States Army, asking two questions. One, could we predict PTSD, the collapse at work? And two, could we predict exemplary work and heroism? And what we found led to the book for me in many ways. First, for failing at work, on day one, all soldiers take a set of psychological questionnaires that we had developed. And we asked the question from day one to all 77,000 soldiers who were deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, could we predict PTSD? And the answer was robust yes. 5% of the soldiers deployed were diagnosed with PTSD. And the factor that predicted it was extreme pessimism, being a catastrophizer, believing that when bad events occur, everything will fall apart. So number one, we could predict extreme failure at work. But number two was even more important and surprising for this audience. For all 990,000 soldiers followed for 5 years, we asked, could we predict from day one who would win exemplary work and heroism medals? 12% of the force does. The description of work, by the way, is very similar to the cross-section of work in America. Three things predicted. First, high positive emotion at day one. Second, low negative emotion, not being a complainer. And third, high optimism. So it was those two authoritative findings that inspired me to work with Gabriella to flesh out what notions like success and failure and resilience are.
Great, thank you. Now, Marty, you've especially had a long, you've been in this field for a long time. You've got a broader historical perspective, I think. Do you think we're seeing a shift in management attitudes, and are senior leaders placing a higher priority on employee well-being now than they have in the past? And
well, I think the generalization that we're seeing now is if your company is hemorrhaging, if you're in trouble, then the performance management of the past is okay. But if you're concerned with growth, then there is a new set of management tools that predicts growth. And these come from positive psychology. And this indeed is what our book Tomorrowmind is about.
right.
Elizabeth, if I could briefly
Please.
chime in on that in terms of maybe even just the last 3 to 4 years. So I think during COVID, we got a lot of requests to talk about employee well-being. There was an urgency around it. And of course, we're hoping that that mentality would be here to stay. Flash forward to 2023, tough economic times, lots of layoffs happening.
Yeah.
And there's certainly been a reversion to thinking in older ways. In some companies, the word well-being is even now something of a 4-letter word from what we've been told. And it's actually something that is seen as a privilege versus what the company wants to be focusing on, which is performance. And our strong message and the message of all of these authoritative studies of millions of people at this point is that well-being is the underpinning of performance. If you don't like the word, you don't have to use the word. You can talk about readiness, you can talk about sustainability, but without well-being, you will not have performance. And so you ignore it at your peril. You silence it at your peril, and part of what we're really calling for is an integration of the thinking about performance with the thinking about well-being, because it's all one brain, it's all one employee, it all has to come together in service of really thriving in this very unusual world of work that we're in.
Right. Thank you. One of the things I found really fascinating about your book was in the opening, where you're really reviewing the sort of history of the human experience with work, and really how we have been adjusting to work that isn't quite designed for the way we're built, the way we've evolved, for many thousands of years. So what is it about the modern work context that causes such an unprecedented degree of psychological stress? And happy to open up, whichever one of you would like to jump in on that.
I can jump in first. In our book, we talk about the pace of change and the nature of change as being kind of the two defining features of the world of work. So the pace of change we know is faster than in previous labor transformations. It's coming faster and faster every day. I think all the developments with GPT-3, 4, et cetera, just this year have been a reminder the way that technology is really fueling that pace of change. It's also the global nature of change that fuels it, because one change begets a million changes that then ripple back. And so it's this feedback cycle that's unlike anything we've seen. And then the nature of change is it's complex, it's wicked problems, nested problems where there's not really a solution. And as soon as you introduce a solution, it changes the entire problem space. that is what we often talk about colloquially as living with uncertainty. It's not just that the change is fast, it's that we can't really see into all of the different repercussions. And so how do we still live with agency in this time? How do we not feel victimized by change? How do we feel, when we're handed down decisions in a corporate environment, like we still have a role to play as thinking, feeling human beings, that it's all this set of concentric problems that comes about as a result of that. And I think the overlay on that's important to point out is the loneliness component, because we are so isolated in the way that we work, and we know that social connection is so essential for our well-being. The Surgeon General just put out an advisory about loneliness. It's real, it's true, it's really bad for our health and well-being. And at the same time, the type of work we're doing, which is innovative, increasingly where we have humans involved, there's also customer service at stake. And so there's the relational piece of it. On innovation, it's collaborative. So much of the work that humans are called on to do is interpersonal in some way. And you contrast that with this increasing loneliness and isolation. And, we have the makings of a problem space here that we also try to address in the book.
These three forms of turbulence all point to how central the notion of resilience is to success at work. And one of the crucial things about the book, Tomorrowmind, it identifies 5 drivers of resilience.
Perhaps the two of you can walk us through. A little interested to know how you derive these, but also how they play out and why they're important.
We can do a duet here, Marty. I can start. So we derive these skills from a few different key data sets. So one is the data set of BetterUp, which is hundreds of thousands of people and millions of coaching sessions across industries. We have outcomes data attached to that. So we see what are people working on, what are their strengths coming in, how are they developing, and then what are the outcomes they see individually, professionally, and then at the organizational level. Overlaying that with the inputs from the broader set of think tanks about the ways skills of work are changing and evolving, and projections on what's going to expire and what's going to spike in the coming decades. And then simply the work of partnering with hundreds of large corporations and the Fortune 1000, small, medium businesses as well, to really hear and listen to corporate leaders about what's happening. So all of that together led to these 5 skills. I can start with prospection maybe, and then there's no better person in the world to talk about resilience and prospection in particular, but than Marty. But let me start with prospection. Hand it to you for resilience, Marty. So, prospection is our ability to imagine and plan for the future, a uniquely human capability. It's not about predicting the future. It's more about foreseeing probabilistically an array of possibilities, and then positioning ourselves in an agile manner, a ready manner against what our collaborator Roy Baumeister calls the matrix of maybe. In an era of constant and uncertain change, this is how we restore agency at the individual level, at the team level, at the organizational level. And it is in some ways the meta skill for our era.
And Marty, I'm going to just advance to slide 1 because I know we have one on resilience, and have that up while you talk about that.
Let me start and then give it to Gabriella.
Okay.
I've worked on resilience my entire 60 years in psychology. And it started by the discovery of learned helplessness. And we asked the question, who never becomes helpless? And what we found was that those people who are invulnerable, who are resilient, were the optimists. And that's what led to the research with the Army. And that's what leads to asking the nuanced question at work, what are the 5 drivers of resilience?
And so what you're looking at here is a regression analysis where we looked at resilience as an outcome for individuals and leaders and organizations, at who responds resiliently, what are the psychological drivers that help them do that? And so you see there are many, the whole list on the left-hand side, but there's 5 that jump out as the biggest drivers. And these are the ones that we emphasize in coaching. Some of these drivers we all have strengths at, and some of them we have opportunities to grow. And having self-awareness around that is really the first step to say, okay, for example, I might be great at cognitive agility, but self-compassion is a challenge for me. And so let me lean on my cognitive agility already today, and let me work on my self-compassion. The brief version on what these 5 are. So emotional regulation is in some ways the foundational skill of maturing as an adult, is our ability to recognize our emotions, to pause in response to them, to reappraise them, and then to choose a response that comes from kind of whole, integrated, thoughtful place, centered place, versus an emotionally reactive place. It's not about silencing the emotions, but it is about giving ourselves space to respond in a more centered fashion. Mm-hmm. Cognitive agility is simply how we move back and forth, not just between ideas, but between altitudes of thinking. So analyzing the forest and then picking a tree we're going to focus on. Being able to go back and forth between those altitudes is so much what's required in today's world of work, and drives our ability to be resilient and not get stuck in one particular solution, one particular mindset. Optimism, I will leave to Marty to tell us about. Self-compassion simply is the ability to extend to ourselves the grace that we extend others in times of challenge. So think about what's happening to you as if it's happening to someone else. And then self-efficacy is kind of like self-confidence. It's a belief that we can overcome, that we can accomplish our goals. And it's built through seeing successive wins. It can be in lots of different arenas, and it transfers over. It generalizes from one arena to another. So it amounts to a sense that I can accomplish something if I set my mind to it. Marty, would you perhaps say a bit about optimism?
Most importantly, given the questions I'm looking at in the chat, all of these drivers of resilience can, 1, be measured, and 2, they can be built, they can be taught. And indeed, much of the book, Tomorrowmind, is about the techniques for reliably increasing all 5 of these drivers.
Right. And that was going to be my next question for you. Actually, well, do we want to pause for a moment and just look back at the other 3 drivers, or keep on?
Oh yeah, let's go back quickly to
let's
those.
just quickly go back, because we don't want to. I think I want to come back to resilience, but I didn't want to overlook these either.
Yeah, great, thank you. Do you want to speak to innovation, Marty, and then I can do the last 2?
Yeah, I had the privilege of spending 3 years of my life in meetings specifically with the most innovative, creative people in 11 different fields. And so we asked the question, what is creative thinking? And now in the innovative literature, it starts with divergent thinking. Well, that's not really very helpful. So the question we asked were, what specifically are the different kinds of creative thinking that we can engage in? And I think there are 4 of them. And I know this well from science. Gabriella knows it well from the world of commerce. Let me talk about them. The first creative mindset, the first creative skill is integration. Integration is seeing that things that look different are really the same. And indeed, this is what Isaac Newton was great at. And so the story that you learned in school about the apple is actually close to true. What happened was at age 21, back at the farm during the plague year, one evening, Newton was sitting near an apple tree and the moon rose.
I'll jump in on the commercial. So Marty was going to give the scientific example of integrative thinking. A commercial example of integrative thinking is the iPhone. So a major integrative victory for us. to put so many different functions all in one place. The four types of innovation where integration is the first one. Splitting would be the next one, which is the opposite of integration. So the idea that two things that we thought were the same are actually different. Third is figure ground reversal, which is realizing that what's most essential about a problem is not what's in the foreground, but what's in the background. And then the last one is called distal thinking, which is more about being able to imagine something that's very different, so different from the here and now, that it's hard for the rest of us to understand it, hard for us to around it. So part of our contribution on this innovation part of PRISM is to say there's different ways of thinking about a creative problem. And within an organization, there will be different strengths, and there will be different areas where the organization needs to actually shore up both its talent and shore up the capabilities within particular teams to have a more well-rounded creative approach.
Right.
The two others on there in the PRISM acronym, social connection. Social connection is essential for our world of work, both for us to thrive personally in our well-being, and as I was saying earlier, for us to be able to serve our customers well, for us to be able to innovate, relies on collaboration. At the same time, we are working largely remotely. We have very little time to connect. And we are navigating difference, which is coming up in so many of the conversations today. We're navigating not just the major dimensions like race and gender and ethnicity, but differences that seem smaller and still really divide us at work. Things like function, things like language, things like the background, the training that we have. These can be forces that pull us apart, and yet we need to be able to work quickly together in a way that has a high element of trust embedded. And then the last one is mattering, and mattering is all about the fuel that keeps us working throughout these challenges. So if you think about what it takes to get up and try again, time after time after time, we need a sense of purpose to do that. And at the very least, we need to believe that our labors matter. Mattering is what's get us out of bed in the morning. And it is a big part of the modern manager's job to narrate mattering, to help explain to each and every person on their team why their labors matter, why they should believe that it matters, even when they have to walk away from 6 months of work to do something completely different. The skill of building mattering for others is a big part of what we believe is missing in the modern approach to management.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella. And I see that we do have Marty back with us. Marty, I think you just need to turn on your camera. And
I can hear you again. I was cut out for about 5 minutes.
yes, we're afraid we lost you. And if you're able to turn on your camera, we should be able to see you again as well. We just have about 5 minutes left, so I wanted to jump over to audience questions because I know we've got a lot of questions for you. I also wanted to add for the audience that the work that Marty addressed early in this session, the research that he did with the Army, it was kind enough to co-write with a couple of other authors an article for Salon Management Review that you can find on our website if you search on Marty's last name. But it's a really nice detailed look at the work that was done linking performance and well-being and optimism. So in our remaining 5 minutes, I think that we addressed this a little bit, but it might be helpful to revisit because the question asked to what degree resilience is it comes from innate personality traits and the degree to which it can be developed, and what are some of the interventions, some of the ways that people can develop that?
Yeah. Well, the short version is it absolutely can be developed, and that's one of the gifts Marty has given humanity, is showing us that it can. This is not a diagnose adios situation. And dovetailing with some of the other questions in the chat, a personalized approach is going to work best. That's part of why we've contributed these 5 drivers, is because you can, for any individual, determine where they're stronger and where they need to focus, and get to a more efficient use of the time spent developing it.
Understood.
The most important way of dealing with pessimism, the risk factor for collapse and building optimism, is to first learn to recognize the most catastrophic things you say to yourself when bad things occur, and treat them as if they were being said by a third person whose mission in life was to make you miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Then to argue realistically against the most catastrophic thoughts you have.
Right. Good. And we had a couple of other questions that were again related to to how we can develop some of these skills. And so I wanted to put up this slide that Gabriella had provided to me a few weeks ago, because this is for an exercise, I believe, that, and Gabriella, you can advance this as you go, using the arrows in the bar below. You can have slide control from your screen, but this was an exercise that sounded really interesting, that I thought might be helpful as people are asking for examples of interventions.
This is the key to becoming realistic, arguing against catastrophizing. Gabriella, you've got some great examples in corporations. Why don't you do the noon Friday message?
Okay, sure. So this is an exercise that helps us in an environment of uncertainty. It can be applied to any environment of uncertainty. And a version of it was used to train soldiers in the Army and Marty's work over the last couple of decades. So imagine that it is noon on a Friday, and you are working away, and you suddenly get a message from your boss's assistant, pops up on your computer, says that the boss needs to meet with you, and here's the link for where to go, or the room for where to go if you're in person. Be there at 4:30. That's it. That's all you get. So there's a signal from the external environment. It could mean a lot of different things. Some people will have an immediate imagined response and interpretation, which is that this must be bad news. It's Friday afternoon. I'm not getting any other information. It's the very end of the day. And they will imagine what's actually a worst possible outcome, which is that they might be getting fired. And getting fired, something bad is happening, and I'm being told this at the end of the week so that my boss doesn't have to deal with me the rest of the week. That is a natural response in some ways, but it can be so overwhelming. We can get into a fight or flight, even just imagining the response to it, right? And so all that's happened from the external world is we've gotten a message from an assistant, and now we're living in a reality where not only might I get fired, but I start to believe I will get fired. I am getting fired. I'm going to change my resume. I'm going to stop working on everything else and just focus on how am I going to deal with getting fired. And again, all that's happened was I got a signal of uncertainty from the external environment. So in any of those situations, you can put a simple line on a paper like this: worst possible, most likely, best possible. You already charted your worst possible. Now you're going to flex yourself all the way to the other side of the spectrum and say, what's the best possible outcome? Really force yourself to think about what those are. In this case, maybe you're getting promoted, you're getting a raise, the boss might be moving off to another role, and you're getting into there's all kinds of unlikely but very positive outcomes. And then you want to spend some time in the very middle of the spectrum and chart out what are all the most likely possible reasons that this signal, all the most likely possible outcomes this signal could be pointing to. And visually, you start to see that there's a bell curve here, and that is a more realistic distribution of possibilities. It recenters you. Now, you don't have to spend the next 4 hours of your Friday cleaning up your resume and reactivating your network. You can keep working on what you need to be working on, be centered, go into this meeting with your boss in a much healthier headspace, open to possibility, but also ready for whatever could be coming.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm afraid, and I'm very sorry to our audience who's been asking a lot of questions, but I'm afraid that is all we have time for today. I'm really grateful for both of you spending the time to join us. Excellent book, highly recommend it, both as a manager and as an individual. I think it's really full of helpful insights, and I hope it's landing with the companies that are still open and willing to invest in this kind of work, because it's really important work that you're doing.